Hey guys, Kate here. Welcome back to another episode of the Wedding Planning Collective podcast. I'm so excited to share today's interview with the fabulous Ashley Lynch of Festoons and Flourishes. Ashley is a fellow Metro Detroit based wedding planner who specializes in luxury weddings. I had so much fun chatting with Ashley, not only because we speak the same wedding planner language, but because there are just so many similarities in our jobs and roles as there are differences. During our chat, we talk about the myth of day of coordination, the different kinds and styles of wedding planners versus wedding designers, the phrase luxury weddings and what it really means, and how a luxury wedding pricing or planning is different than the average wedding, different ways wedding planners structure their pricing, the process of creating a wedding design and phase based wedding planning. We also talk about our favorite moments of a wedding day, the different elements of a wedding, her take on wedding trends, and finally, Ashley shares her top tips to making sure you enjoy your wedding day. This conversation was really long overdue, and I'm proud to be sharing some behind the scenes thoughts with two veteran wedding planners. Make sure to check out Ashley's Instagram at Festoons and Flourishes. You're going to absolutely drool over her weddings. All right, let's get to it. Well, thank you so much, Ashley, for joining me today. I am really excited to get into this conversation. We did have a little bit of a false start last week, I guess I will call it. We had a little bit of a conversation. The recording wasn't working, and we were both just like so excited to get into it. So I can't wait now that we're actually recording to start chatting with a fellow wedding planner and talk all things wedding and wedding planning and yeah, all of that. So thank you so much for joining me here today.
My pleasure. I'm so excited to be here. This will be so fun.
So before we get too far into the actual wedding planning of it all, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, when you started your company, your what you specialize in when it comes to weddings?
Yeah. So my company's name is Festoons and Flourishes, but my name is Ashley, the person behind it. I do have an incredible team behind me as well, who are amazing, and I adore them. Without them, I couldn't do what I do. And so my first season in business was 2014. Started off with day of coordination, and then went into partial planning, and then full service planning, and now we're here. And I actually had a full career in restaurants and catering for roughly around 15 years before I started this company. So I came in from the more hospitality kind of part of the industry, really kind of taking care of people and really understanding food and beverage and those types of experiences and building off of that. So I feel like it was a really incredible transition to go from that to a wedding. And I've always loved weddings, so it was an easy thing for me to want to jump into. And I kind of did that organically over a few years. And then just in end of 2013, I was like, let's do it. Let's put it out there and see what happens. And yeah. And now I have the absolute privilege to produce about 6 to 8 very full scale, very unconventional weddings every year. We do not do your typical wedding. They have all of the typical ingredients like flowers and candles and all those things, but they're very experiential, very hospitality based, bringing kind of that hospitality industry back into everything. It's really about getting to know my clients and bringing their wildest dreams to life. And I always like to joke that we basically design this experience. It's like a fever dream, and we dump them and their guests into the fever dream for however many days or hours, and then we dump them right back out.
I love it.
And that's pretty much what we do.
You followed, so anybody that isn't following Ashley over on Instagram, definitely make sure to go follow. It's Festoons and Flourishes. It really is that description is so perfect, that that fever dream, because it really is. If you follow along on a wedding day or an event day with you, it just is like, what is happening next? Like, what is going on? And I know it might seem a little bit odd for some people, like, why would I have another wedding planner in the same market on the podcast. But we'll talk about it a little bit, how vastly different what we do in our clientele. And I thought it would be really interesting to hear the different sides of wedding planners, and how, even though we have the same title, we have very different clientele, we have very different approaches. And I think it's interesting for couples to hear that there is a difference between different wedding planners and what the services are. So that's where I thought we're going to jump right in. So one of the things that you mentioned is you started with day of coordination. And I think I've mentioned it briefly in the podcast, but haven't really talked about it too much. There are a lot of planners out there that really don't like day of coordination. Of course, all of us hate the title. Day of coordination is super deceiving. There's really nothing called, day of coordination does not exist. You can find that on the other podcast where I talked about it and kind of broke it down. But for a lot of planners, they don't like the idea of even month of or event management, where like you're jumping in closer to the event. I believe I'm correct that you don't offer that anymore. Is that correct?
Not as a standalone service. Of course, I mean, to me, day of coordination, or what I called it, wedding management. So yeah, event management, is the building block. It's the logistics of a wedding. So even though we don't offer it as a standalone service, it is still a part of every single event and wedding we do.
And when you break it down,
it is the foundation of running.
It is. And that's how I usually describe it, because I do offer it still as a standalone for my clients. And I always say that's the base service. Every couple, regardless of what level of help you need, everyone needs to have somebody there to manage the event. And then you can kind of build things on. But whether it's partial or full service or anywhere in that spectrum, your planner should be there for all of those day of type of activities and responsibilities. But can you tell me a little bit about why you decided to not have that as a standalone service?
Well, I was just really trying to kind of focus in on those kind of full service events. So I really kind of really work with a clientele who are wanting something a little bit different. But of course, every single planning or coordinating service that you offer takes quite a bit of time. And even month of, day of wedding management, I mean, that's, again, I agree with you. It's such a misnomer, because there's nothing day of about it. There's nothing month of about it. Like when I offered those services, I would start working with people months and months in advance, so I could be gathering all of their logistics. I mean, it takes a good 20 to 30 plus hours of pre-prep to gather everything, sort through everything, make sure you have a full understanding of everything, and then execute the actual wedding. And then there's a little bit of follow-up at the end. But I mean, it's not just a single day. So it's a massive misnomer. But I stopped doing it just because my passion really lies in kind of creating these experiences. And the experiences that I do can sometimes take hundreds, if not 1,000 plus hours to create. And I really did not have the desire to grow my company into something very, very large with multiple associate planners. I really love being able to spend time with my clients and get to know them. I mean, that's the basis of my business, is having this relationship with these people, and a lot of whom I still keep up with afterwards, and like they mean so much to me, and their families mean so much to me. So being able to spend time with them and do that is what my passion is, and that's where I went with it. So I just didn't have time to continue with more stuff, really, when it came down to it. But to me, there is nothing wrong at all with managing a wedding. To be perfectly honest, it's probably the most important part of a wedding.
You can design a beautiful wedding, but if you fumble on the execution of it, it doesn't much matter, right?
It's like going out to a restaurant and you have incredible food, but your service is horrible. and it's disjointed and it's not good. And I mean, you'll never go back. I do not care how beautiful a wedding is. If the experience and the logistics and the way it runs isn't
Yeah,
smooth, you will have a horrible time no matter how many hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars somebody spent to make the flowers pretty.
absolutely.
Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah, definitely. It's such an important component, and I think that's why stressing that every couple needs to have that, at least that day of coordinator, month of coordinator, event manager, whatever you're calling it, somebody that's there dedicated to you, not the venue, not your DJ, whatever it might be, somebody that's dedicated to you as the couple and can really help make sure all of that flows. I think one of the main reasons that a lot of planners don't like day of coordination is because they lose a lot of control over recommendations for different vendors,
Yeah.
how you're doing things. But a huge component of a professional that's offering day of coordination is that they're going to catch up on all of that too. And so that's where it can be really tricky. Like, yes, we step in a couple months before, but it's at that point we might be like, oh, you really messed stuff up. You messed some stuff up, or you forgot stuff, or whatever it might be.
Well, that's when I did wedding management, when the moment they hired me, that's when I would
Yeah,
start in. So I would just have, as they would book things or something like that, they would send stuff to me. So I could,
catch
one,
up.
it didn't all get dumped onto my
Yeah,
lap like within the last month. And I could just kind of like keep up on everything in like little
yeah,
bits. But I was able to catch a lot of stuff doing that. And then if they wanted to, they could add on stuff that before they even, like a contract
yeah,
management, that if they wanted me to look at contracts before they even signed, I would be able to at least
yeah,
look at that. So, but yeah, but I know I very much agree with you. It gives you a lot less control of what's happening, everything like that. And everybody's very obsessed with the
yes,
visuals of a wedding versus like the function of a
yeah,
wedding. Which, don't get me wrong, I love the visuals. Like, I'll never not.
yeah,
It's one of my favorite things, but I do need to I do make sure that before my clients even hire me, that they understand that I'm not going to ever pour all their money into a
yeah.
design. Like, we need to make sure that every single thing, from the food to the beverage, the music, everything should be
It feels
excellent.
cohesive. Yeah.
And we can't just
Yeah.
prioritize one for the sake of the
Yes.
others.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And I think that's a perfect segue into talking about the differences in styles of wedding planners. And then we can kind of talk a little bit about like your ideal couple or wedding, or however we want to describe it. But I think a lot of couples would be shocked to know that there really are different, not just personalities, but different
many.
styles of planners outside of day of coordination and like the services that are offered. But I think the two of us are like a perfect example of like the different styles where I consider myself more of the planner part of it versus the designer and an overall event. I think designer is probably the best word. And sometimes I do get that question, like, what's the difference between a wedding planner or a wedding designer? And to me, I don't have that artistic bone in my body that you do when you're looking at some of
And
these
that's
events,
okay.
and that's fine. And that's where I'm going to be working with couples to connect them with the florist, with the style
Mhm.
teams, to bring in that piece of it, versus a planner like you that, and I'll have you kind of describe it, but you definitely, I would say, encompass more of that designer kind of vibe where, like you said, you're going through that experiential feeling from the stationery to the floral to pulling all of those things together. Does that make sense? Is that
It does make sense. Well, I think the first thing is kind of like understanding that there are multiple levels of
Mhm.
planning. We just kind of went through the day of coordination slash wedding management is how I prefer people
Yeah,
adopt it. But wedding management, which is, it's your foundation, it's your logistics, it's how something runs, it's how it functions. It, to me, like, every planner should start there. That if you can build an incredible foundation, it means that no matter whatever type of planning you want to go into, like, you are going to just like still be very excellent at whatever
yeah,
event that you do. And then basically from there, there's this kind of partial planning aspect where you can help with little bits and pieces, kind of like hop in wherever a client needs some additional help, or like, hey, maybe in this case, like if somebody is more of a designer, like, hey, I can help you with your design, but you can plan
Yeah.
everything, so on and so forth. And then there's this kind of full service planning aspect, which is basically
Yeah.
everything, where you're planning, you're designing, you're doing all of that stuff. And then to your point, there is also lots of different roles of different types of planners. There's designers, there's producers, there's which designers and producers can be kind of
Yeah.
considered almost the same thing. It really just kind of depends on what they're doing, and like the scale. But yeah, there's the planner, there's a designer, there's somebody who literally, I mean, you and I know a company who literally only ever wants to do it
Yep.
day of, and they do it so
Yep.
excellently. Like that is their passion, and I
Yeah.
love that. But yeah, so I would consider myself kind of that co-planner and
Yeah.
designer. I'm really designing across the board, trying to tie everything in, no matter if it's design based or not, into an experience. So essentially, I'm designing
Yeah.
everything. I'm designing an experience, not just something that's
Yeah.
visual.
Not just like the
Um,
centerpieces or the,
mhm.
like you said, the visual piece that your guests are gonna see that we
Yeah. I'm like creating this like sensory experience, like from what you see to what you hear to what you taste, like so on and so forth. Like that's like my version of design. But then there are designers who literally just do not want to do any of the planning
Mhm.
portion, but they just want to create a beautiful
Yeah.
wedding. And that's it. And then they leave the logistics and everything to more of a
Yeah.
planner that just likes to kind of hone in on
So
logistics.
who
Did I kind of describe that
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
okay? Luxury itself, it's a buzzword that's kind of like recently come up in the last few years. And I feel like not a lot of people, unfortunately, like
Yeah.
understand what that means. But the word luxury actually is a defining term for specific level, like price
Yeah.
points of weddings. Luxury, and there's always kind of these like this is my version, but I've seen a million of them. But there's budget weddings, there's something called a lovely wedding. I don't love that term, but we'll use it for lack of a better term at this point in time. But it's kind of like it's not budget, but it's not like full blown
Yeah.
luxury.
More average.
Yeah, kind of like your
Yeah.
mid-range weddings kind of thing, which there's multiple
Yeah.
levels of that too. So it's not just like if you're in this little pocket, it's actually a pretty
Yeah,
wide pocket.
absolutely.
Um, and then and then there's luxury weddings, which again, there's multiple levels of
Mhm.
luxury weddings. Most I would consider most entry level luxury weddings, and clearly there's a lot of defining factors. A lot of it is I like to base budgets on like guest
Okay.
count, like per person prices versus saying like you have to spend this much
Yeah.
money. Because if you spend this much money but only have 50 people, or if you spend the same amount of money and have 500
Very different.
people, that's a
Yeah.
massively different experience. Like, yeah, if you spend $250,000 on 50 people, you're going,
Yeah.
whew, let's go to Italy and make it
Experience.
happen.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna have the experience of a lifetime. It'll
Yeah.
be fabulous.
It doesn't stretch quite as far if you've
But
got
if
400 people.
yeah,
Still a beautiful wedding.
exactly. So
Yeah.
gorgeous, but I mean, you're stretching it so much because the guest count really does control so
Yeah.
much of that budget. So I always like to think of budgets in terms of per person pricing. So I would say if you had however many guests, but I would consider kind of luxury entry level luxury at roughly around like 1,250
Okay.
ish dollars, like 1,000, 1,250. That's kind of like your entry level luxury, with then really kind of going upwards of like
Yeah.
$3,000 a person, kind of like at the top end of luxury. And then there's something actually beyond that called ultra luxury, and those are your celebrity weddings. Those are your people who start at $1 million, and like that is those are like the really
Yeah.
large budgets. you're seeing those on
Yeah.
Pinterest and all over social media and everything like that. Those are
Those are the
your
ones making
ultra
the
luxury
headlines. Yeah,
weddings.
absolutely.
Correct. And again, there's multiple levels of that. I mean, there are people, I mean, we saw case in point, they called it the wedding of the century
Mhm.
last year, who spent like nearly 60,000. It was nearly $60 million
Crazy.
on a
Yeah,
wedding and rented out Versailles and like all these things. And I mean, amazing. But that's very different than
yeah,
$1 million,
yeah.
which is still a
Oh,
lot of money.
absolutely. Absolutely.
It's very
But when you
different.
compare it, it's
It's
like,
very
oh, it was just
different.
$1 million wedding. It's so crazy to think of that scale of it. So
So when there's luxury, a lot of people don't they just kind of think, oh, I just want to take high end
yeah,
budgets, and so they tack luxury onto the front of their
yes,
name, not understanding what that actually means, because you might be at a different level at that point and you're moving up, and that's fine. And like a slow growth builds strong roots. Like that's great. Like I didn't start
yeah,
here 11 years ago. I started
yeah.
vastly different 11 years ago. And I've grown it every year, and I'll continue growing it through my life. And that's great. And I would consider myself a luxury planner, but it's also something that I don't necessarily like slap on
Yeah.
my name either.
It's definitely become one
So,
of those words in the wedding industry that you see in a lot of like Instagram bios and on websites. Luxury planner premier is one that I think we're getting away from a little bit, but it definitely for a while it
mhm.
felt like every vendor, regardless of the category, was the premier vendor in their area. It's like, okay, mean anymore. And I think to your point,
Means
we're
nothing.
kind of seeing that with luxury too, that it is kind of taking away a little bit from that. Now, what I often teach is a little bit different from what you just talked about. And I think this is a perfect conversation for us to have, and like what the difference is. When I'm talking about budgeting, this is not to the luxury bride, but more the average bride planning their wedding. I typically try to steer away from saying per person and rather talk about like the big picture number, because most people
Mhm.
have, there's a number, there is a finite number of what you have in your bank account, what your parents are helping with, whatever you might have that you can put towards the wedding. And so when we're talking about average budgets, I think that's generally the way to go. If you're talking about a luxury experience, though, how do you start with that process? Like, I'm assuming your couples don't come to you and say, we've got 1,500 per person, have at
No. Yeah.
it. So how do you kind
Yeah.
of start that
Definitely not.
process, or how do you determine what that is?
Well, and I'll answer that in a second, but I do want to let you know, before I kind of started into luxury, I did a very similar
Yeah,
budget stuff to you. It was more about, this is
yeah,
our budget, like in the like large chunk number. It was only really when I started kind of gearing into luxury that I started splitting things into kind of per
yeah. It's a
person
different mindset.
pricing.
And that's kind of why I wanted to say that, because it does, like, I fully understand why and how you do that approach, but just to say like that is how you can, if you need to keep an eye on a certain budget, things can spiral very quickly, because most companies and most of the tools you're going to see and all of that are not going to be like, yes, at the very end you can break it down per person, but it's a different mindset when
Yeah.
you don't go into it like, this is the budget we have and how are we going to break it down.
Yeah. So basically when potential clients come to me, I don't have any pricing anywhere on my website or anything like that. But I mean, I think people can tell from kind of my events and everything like that. It's like, it's not the run
Yeah.
of the mill. And again, nothing wrong with run of the mill. I had a run of the mill wedding. It was beautiful and I loved it. I love my husband of 13 years, but like I couldn't afford me.
I think that
but
I mean,
um,
there's something just not hiding behind that too. Like, talking to other vendors, like, we're not the budget friendly. Then, like, if you are on a tight budget, there are certain vendors you're probably not hiring a planner at all. But yeah, just to kind of recognize that, I think is important too, to just say like, you're not going to meet every couple is not going to be able to afford what you're putting together when it comes to a luxury wedding.
N- No, definitely not. And I would say most of it, like I say no, or it doesn't work out for 99% of the events that
Yeah.
reach out to us. And I don't take offense at that or anything like that. We have, not to sound too much like a Jason Bourne or anything with Liam Neeson, but I have a very specific skill
Yeah.
set. And people are looking for something very specific
Yeah.
from us, and with a lot of details and a lot of thought and time that goes into it. And I am not the cheapest planner in the world. I'm not also the most expensive planner
Mhm.
in the world at this point. But I definitely come with a specific price point, but that pays for a lot of time and a lot of access to me for my clients, and they're getting a lot of stuff, and even the planning experience from our end is going to be a lot more
Yeah.
hands-on, and they're going to get a lot more than say just like a typical planning
Yeah.
process would. And so yeah, because we do have that relationship forming, and it's typically a pretty close one. So but yeah, so I typically, when somebody will email me saying like, hey, we would really love to work with you or find out more about your information about your services or costs, I typically send out a PDF that kind of just like goes a little bit more into what our planning process is, like what people can expect, and then an initial starting per
Gotcha.
person cost, like, hey, I know that you love our work and everything like that. We're so excited to talk with you. Before we go further, like I want to kind of give you a little bit of like a benchmark of what we do
Yeah.
require for a budget, because the last thing I want to do is set an expectation that I can deliver what they're seeing on our social media or our website for a much lower
Yes.
cost. Like the last thing I want is for somebody, it doesn't matter how much money they're spending on their wedding. I want them to make incredibly smart choices for how they spend their money so they feel like they're getting the best bang for their buck, no matter what
Yeah.
kind of level of of wedding they're having.
Absolutely.
So I'll be the first one to tell them like, hey, as much as I would love to work with you, I don't necessarily feel like we're the greatest fit, because I feel like our costs are going to maybe have you sacrifice things
Mhm.
that are going to be more important for you. And then I also do have some incredible other planners who I know focus in on different price levels and everything like that, who can maybe do more with them.
Yeah.
And I refer them to those
Yeah.
planners to reach out and
Yeah.
connect. So I never want somebody to like feel like they've left an interaction with me and they still don't have a road to go
Yeah,
down.
or that you've kind of like dismissed them. It's not that at all. It's just when
No.
you have such a fine niche of who and what you're looking
Mhm.
for, and just recognizing too, like the type of wedding you take is not going to be at every venue every weekend, and so you need to kind of fine tune that a little bit, and that's where you kind of look to see like where do you find that spot. So how do you, this is another area where I know we differ. For all of my services, whether we're talking about day of through full service, when talking to them, we put together an initial flat fee, like a rate depending on the venue, the logistics of what they need help with, all of that. But at the beginning, outside of a couple exceptions, we set a flat rate, and then that's their rate. There are other models that planners will use based on commission. So sometimes planners will get commission from vendors they recommend, and that's how they make their money. So it's almost like a travel agent, where like you're not actually paying the travel agent, but they get the commission from the resorts and the airlines and all of that. And then there's another model where it's like a percentage base, where the fee for the planner is based on the overall cost of the wedding. And that's how you have things structured. Is that correct? So,
Yes. Yep. So I'm a
okay.
percentage.
Tell me a bit about how, but I'm guessing you probably started, and when you did day of, it was more like flat fee. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely started
Yeah.
flat fee. No, I've only recently been percentage over the last, I would say, 3 or 4 years. COVID kind of, I finally got to a point where I was especially with flat fees, like the bigger the wedding I was taking, the less
Yeah.
money I was making because the more hours I was spending. And I was just like, I'm making
Yeah.
$1 an hour. This is
Yeah.
great. So, so I started with flat
Yeah.
fees, of course. I remember, I think I charged like $500 for my first wedding. I thought it was like the most expensive thing. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
I think mine was, I mean, this was just a day of, but I think it was like 50 or 100. Now it was about 10 years before yours, but yeah,
Oh no, you're
thinking
good.
back on that.
Well, that was my first
Yeah.
legitimate wedding. So when I was still working in the restaurants, the first wedding I ever got asked to coordinate, which they were like, "Hey, you're kind of type A and a little weird.
According
Like,
with
do you want to
checklists.
like coordinate my friend's wedding?" And I'm like, "Sure, I've never done it, but I'll try." I think I got paid like $200 and then they tipped me
Yeah.
100. And at that point in time, I was like, "Oh
This is
my gosh,
amazing.
like this is amazing." So like
We'll start somewhere.
always be You gotta
Yeah.
start somewhere. But yeah, my first like two legitimate like weddings under the Festoons and Flourishes name were I think $500 a piece. And of course that included like a full 15-hour
Yeah.
day plus the rehearsal plus like 20 plus
Oh my
hours of like
gosh.
prep before. And I'm like, I don't even want to do that
Yeah, I
math
know.
to
I know.
see
Thinking back, it's like I paid them, you know.
basically. And I was working by myself at that point. Like I hadn't started having like
Yeah.
assistants with me or anything like that. So, but yeah, I started with a flat fee. I was a flat fee for like a good
Yeah.
7-ish plus years. And then as I really started kind of understanding that I really wanted to be the trajectory of like
Yeah.
luxury weddings and doing things a little bit more on a grander scale, that's when I was like, I know I need to switch to percentage, which I would say the bulk of planners who do luxury events and or ultra luxury are all
Yeah,
percentage based.
absolutely.
Um, because of course with percentage, um, because you're spending so much time on something, and typically the bigger the wedding, the more the
Yeah.
work, the more labor I need. I mean, I'll have anywhere between 5 and 25 people on my team on any given wedding day, and that's not even including all of the other
Yeah.
vendors. Like we
That's
could
just
have,
your team.
I know there was yeah, just alone at like I remember a wedding we did at the State Savings Bank in 2022. We I think inclusive of my team, which I think was maybe 13 or 14 people over a 2-day period. Each day we had 150 like team
Wow.
members, like just running
That's
the event,
crazy.
from like service
Yeah.
staff to like I think it was like 150 plus on
Wow.
both days, like trying to get everything taken care of. It was a
That's
little crazy.
amazing.
So yeah, so I mean, the typically the bigger the wedding, the more expensive it is, the more work it is, the more labor we need, the more
Yeah.
everything. So then with a percentage, then it means that we're getting compensated accordingly,
Mhm.
for the work that we're putting in. And then, of course, if for some reason, like to a specific point, like what if the guest count drops 50 people, so on and so forth, then there's a little
Yeah.
less work and there's a little like we don't have to do XYZ for this many people, which of course is many hours for
Yeah.
us and so on and so forth. So then it also keeps it fair for our clients that it kind of can fluctuate up or
Yeah.
down depending upon the scope
Yeah.
of work. So and that's typically like how I kind of
Yeah.
describe what percentage is like, but it does really keep it fair for both me and my team, but then also my my
Yeah.
clients as
I
well.
think that makes so much sense. And one of the reasons I really wanted to talk about that piece of it, or I think it's an interesting thing for the two of us to talk about, is because both of our models make perfect sense for the clients that we're working with. If there was a planner doing like a day of and they were saying it's based on percentage, I would say that is a massive red flag. Run far, far away,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you know? And
The scope of work isn't
yeah,
changing. It's pretty much you can get it down to a science at
yeah.
that point.
And
So
I'm not saying, this is kind of a tricky thing because I fully get the commission thing. Like there are some vendors that we both work with that offer vendor pricing, and then they leave it up to us to either rent out under our company versus just pass that discount along to the clients. And I think there are some cases, like obviously, if you're managing the order, you're taking that on, adding in a fee to cover those costs of doing that work makes complete sense. But I think there are some planners that like just try to get the commissions or try to do things, and then it can be
Yeah.
a hard line of am I recommending this vendor because I think they're the best, or are they the most expensive that's going to get my commission the highest? So that's where I think it's important for couples to kind of think before hiring a planner, think about like what is it that they're needing their planner for? Is it an experiential kind of like fever dream of an event that you want that needs that like passion behind all of those hours? Then that makes sense. But if you just want somebody
Mm-hmm.
to, not just want, but you know what I mean, if you are looking for somebody to kind of take some of the legwork off of a more traditional event, then paying percentage
Mm-hmm.
may not be your best route.
No. Well, and it can, I mean, dependent upon what you need, it can get pretty
Yes.
expensive, and then all of a sudden your budget, it goes off the rails and so on and so forth. And I always get kind of like, I don't always get this question, but I know that it's a thought for some people. It's like, as a percentage, like what's kind of going off of your um thoughts about the commission is like, what's keeping me from suggesting
Yeah.
the most expensive vendor so I can get the biggest percentage? And I always make it very clear from the get-go, like before somebody even hires me and signs a contract, is that all final decisions are my
Mhm.
client's decisions. We do have to come to mutual agreements on
Yeah.
vendors, no matter what, because I can't be babysitting, for lack of a
Yeah.
better term, vendors who are like family friends who've never worked events and so on and so forth, and will make my job much harder, cause lots of extra hours or anything like that, or just it doesn't end up working
Save
out
a
right.
couple
So
bucks.
I
Yeah.
do have I do have requirements that, and they're all in my contract, that like whoever we work with has to have at least 5 years of professional wedding industry experience. They have to have event
Yeah.
experience. And especially with design vendors, we have to come, because we're so well known for our designs, we have to come to a mutual
Yeah.
agreement of who we hire, because of course, like that's also marketing for me. That's I mean, we when we produce an event, we have our
It's your
name all over it,
reputation.
and
Yeah.
it's my reputation and like what we put out in the world and so on and so forth. And clearly when people come to want to work with us, I feel like they're coming because they want our version of their
Yeah.
wedding, and really creating that for them and creating the experience they want. So I would think that they're coming to me anyway because they want to work
With you.
with
Yeah.
me versus creating something from a
Yeah.
different planner. Um, but but yeah, so all my clients know that every decision is kind of their final decision. So, like when we look at a DJ or something like that, of course, I have expensive DJs that we can work with that are incredible and so on and so forth. And like if they're wanting that particular type of experience, I'll send their
Yeah.
information. But then we can also look at other options that are a lot less expensive. Like we'll look at different
Different levels.
experiences at
Yeah.
different price points for the same thing. And then they can make the
Yes.
decision of what's best for them. And if they want to splurge because music's a really big priority for them and they have to have incredible dancing, then let's splurge. But if it's not a priority, then you know what? Maybe we save here and have a really great DJ, but it's not like
Yeah, but
$25,000. It's more
you're never
like
gonna be hiring the DJ off of Craigslist, to get the
five.
the
Definitely not. But I also believe that whenever we're suggesting, we're pairing vendors and creative partners for our specific vendor teams for any given event, because every client couple is so
Mhm.
different. Every vendor team, although there are repeats here
Yeah,
and there, and of course have relationships with incredible vendors, but I really believe in pairing the right vendor for
the
this
couple, the
particular
event, yeah,
job to the client. So it's not the same florist every time. It's not the same rental companies every time. It's not the same band every time. It's really about making that
Yeah.
experience, for lack of a better term, and really putting together a very unique team for just this
Yeah.
particular client couple.
Isn't that fun when when you're first talking to couples, whether it's, you know, connected with you working their wedding or not, they start telling you what they want about or what they're looking forward to at their wedding, and certain vendors pop up, like a
Mhm.
certain florist might pop up. You're like, ooh, they need this band or DJ or whatever it might be. Like there really is, you can get the vibe of different vendors in the area and know like, oh, you know who would be a good fit for this one, you know? And it's funny to even see like scrolling through Instagram too, especially when it comes to floral and design. Like scrolling through, I'm like, oh, this is one of Ashley's weddings. Then you look at the profile, it's like, yep. But like they're so different, but there's still that like there's that vibe and you know,
There's a
yeah,
connecting
yeah,
vibe
yeah.
for sure.
So tell me about the design piece.
It's a little weird and wacky.
Tell me about the design piece. How do you, I think that's one of the things that couples have the hardest time with, regardless of whether they would put themselves in the luxury category or not. Like they'll tell me they know what pictures they like, but they don't know how do you take that from the fever dream to the actual wedding day? What is your process like?
So I think I'm going to say the first mistake a lot of couples make is they want to start straight into the design the moment they get engaged. They're like, we want to go
They want
see
to buy the dress
florists, and like,
and they want to
this is
get,
what our
yeah,
like. Buy your dress, go for it,
yeah,
enjoy. But beyond that, like, you need to understand way more about your wedding before you can decide what it's
yeah,
going to look like. So I do something called phase-based planning, where we basically break everything up into four
yeah,
phases. First is, of course, finding a
yeah.
venue. I always kind of equate myself as like the general contractor. It's like so cheesy, but it's the best way
It's
to
so,
describe it. I'm the general
yeah,
contractor of your wedding
yeah,
house or building. So we need to find a lot first,
yeah.
and we need a build date, aka we need a venue and we need your
Yeah,
date. So we cannot do
until we get to that.
anything until we have both of those. But before we do that, we also go through an estimated budget. We go through kind of what they're looking for, like what is the
Yeah.
dream? Because also the last thing you ever want to do is get into a venue that is too
Mhm.
expensive. And then all of a sudden you want to start designing, but you have no
This is
money
the kind of
left.
stuff you see me like,
So
yes, yes, because it's again, there's so much that is similar and so much that's different when you're talking about the luxury versus the regular weddings. But my inside the membership, the course is called the Wedding Planning Blueprint, and I talk about how
Mhm.
it is very similar to building your house. You have to start with that foundation first, and I have like
Yeah, the
the
foundation.
pillars of starting that foundation. And so many couples skip right past that foundation because it's not the fun stuff, you know? It's
Exactly.
not the sexy stuff that like you want to get into, but it's so important. That's why I'm like laughing, and I promise we've never talked about this before. So to know that,
No, we really haven't. But I mean, it's also proof that no matter what type of planner that you are, these foundational pillars are very
absolutely.
much the same. It's just we kind of like have our own
Yeah.
versions of them. But yeah, and then we go into what I call the service-based vendors first. So we go into your needs. Like
Mhm.
you cannot do your wants before you get your needs. So you have a venue, your needs are typically the people who once they're booked they're gone. So if photographer, if you want a
Yeah.
videographer, like if you don't have in-house catering, you need food, you need beverage, you need all of those things. You need to start with the actual services that create the wedding itself. Again, I don't care how good it looks at this point, I just want to know how it's going to
Yeah.
function. So you have to feed people. Well, you don't have to. Like if you want like a 2-hour wedding, in that case, like have some like fun
Yeah.
snacks and call it a day. I mean, you can do your wedding however you want. There's no
The
one way to do it,
majority of
which
the
is great.
weddings, though, there's going
But
to be food and booze.
the
Yeah.
majority, your typical like dinner
Yeah.
based wedding, you need to you start with the service based vendor. So you have your venue, and then you start with all of the things you
Yeah.
need. Start with those, get those down. Again, kind of, we've done that estimated budget way before we even did the venue, ideally. So we can kind of understand like how much we have for specific things. And I always do a budget range for everything. Like, oh, your photographer is going to cost X amount to X amount, dependent upon what we want to
Yeah.
do. So that's something that I typically try to do so they can kind of see what their wedding would be at a low end versus like a more high end. And of course, the high end could be plus, plus, plus,
Yeah.
plus, plus, but because there's really no limit of how far you
Yeah.
can go. Like, yes, we can dip things in gold. Enjoy. Probably not the best use of money, but if you want to do
You know
that,
what?
I will find somebody to dip stuff
You
in
can make
gold for you.
anything happen in any amount of time with the right budget, right?
Exactly. Like, yeah, I mean, we can always spend more money. It's just whether or not that's a
Yeah.
right decision is a different thing. I mean, to me, like, I never want my clients to ever spend needless
No.
money. Like, I want them to spend money on the things that they actually truly care about and that we either need or that they are just like feel very
Yeah.
drawn to. Like, every dollar spent has a purpose,
Absolutely.
and it's not just for the sake of
Yeah.
spending money. It doesn't matter how wealthy my clients are. Like, I want to make sure that they're not just like willy-nilly
Yeah.
spending money, like unless they know that that's something that they're
I
wanting
think,
to
and then
do,
it comes,
which I've never met that
yeah,
person.
it comes back to your reputation too. Like, you don't want to be known as the planner that just spends other people's money for no reason. Like, it's got to be a
No.
good, solid reason behind it. Yeah.
And this is why all my clients have final
Yeah.
veto power of everything. We don't make a payment without their
Yeah.
consent. So yeah, I mean, I'll facilitate payments, but you have to
Yeah.
agree to it. So yeah. But yeah, we start with the needs, and then once we set the needs, so many months into a
Yeah.
wedding, clearly I'm kind of going off of a traditional like 8 month to a
Yeah.
year planning cycle. Some of our largest weddings have like a 4 to 5 month planning cycle, and then we have others that are a year and
Yeah.
a half. So, but kind of going off of a more traditional planning cycle, like many months in, that's when we're starting to talk
Yeah.
about design. We're doing a little bit here and there. Like we'll talk about, I'll typically kind of give them little homeworks to be like, hey, can each of you make like a little Pinterest board? And I don't want you to put wedding related stuff, but I want you to put stuff that inspires
Yeah.
you, like visual things. So like places you want to travel to, and photos that inspire you, and architecture and art and literature. Like I want you each to do that and then send that in to me so I can start understanding who
Yeah.
each of you are aesthetically. And then from there, I've gotten to know them enough in a few months and kind of pick their brains about things. And of course, I have like onboarding questionnaires that ask them a lot of like very pointed questions and things that are a little out there and so on and so forth. So I have a really good idea of like what they're really wanting
Yeah.
visually at that point. So I start slow. I start with a mood board and color palettes and see how they react to
Yeah.
that. And if they're like, yes, got it, and then we can move on. And then we start making dinner floor plans and kind of going through things, but we take the design stuff very
Yeah.
slowly, which even my clients sometimes are just kind of like, I
I
want to do this now. And
know.
I'm like, we're not so. And I try and set those expectations like right at the
Yeah.
very beginning. Like, this is the plan that we're moving through. And don't get me wrong, there's exceptions to the rule, but I want to have the time to get to know them so I can do right by them by designing visually and not visually an incredible
Yeah.
experience for them that is a reflection of them. And I want to give them time to change their mind.
Yes.
A year out, you might love one thing, and then 6 months later, you might be like, oh, I don't like
Yeah.
this.
And when you first start planning too, you don't necessarily know what options are available for you too, to know, like, maybe you've been dreaming of this perfect dress, but you didn't see what you look like in it. And now it's like, that's not really me. That kind of thing goes with every category. Maybe as you're looking at flowers, it's like, where you pick a venue that it doesn't mesh well with. Yeah. But it can be really challenging sometimes with those couples that want to get right into that planning piece of it. I had a couple last year that they were such a sweet couple, and they were so hands-on. But it was a backyard wedding, and she had a lot of particular wants in regards to like the tent and the food and like other things that we needed to get a handle on from a budget standpoint, what some of this stuff is going to do before we can really get into the flowers and know what we have left over for the pretty stuff. And so as you were talking, like I remember the meeting that we were several months in, and we finally got to talk flowers. And she was like, "I am so excited," but and I know it was killing her in those months to not be already getting into that. But it was so important that then from then on we knew like where our budget was with other things, what we had, and they felt more educated in that process that like, okay, now I get why we had to do that other stuff first. If you commit to a florist, before you pick your menu, you can be really, I think that's where a lot of couples will start getting in over their head as far as the budget goes, when you don't
Yeah.
have, the luxury budget to to deal with.
Well, I mean, even in the
Yeah,
luxury
yeah, yeah.
budget, I mean, we'll start with a specific budget, and I mean, I've seen budgets double, triple,
Hmm.
like because they they just want all of the
Yeah,
things, and like we try and follow along to a budget as much as possible, but when somebody wants to
yeah,
splurge on something, that's their decision. And of course, like I'm giving them all this other stuff that if they want to, I mean, that's their
yeah,
prerogative. They can absolutely splurge on those things, and as long as they're being well informed about like, hey, well, this we might need to rob Peter to pay Paul or something like that if we want to stick to the master budget that we were thinking, or we just need to expand it to make sure that we can meet all of these new
yes,
things that
yeah,
you want that have developed over the last few months. And that's fine. I mean, the budget is, to me, I always see it as this like
yes,
fluctuating, like living thing. It goes up, it goes down, depending upon
yeah.
what you want. And
I think that is,
things change.
yeah, I think that's something that couples think like you do the budget once, you set it and then you're done with the budget. But it really, and this is regardless of whatever your end amount is, whether you're super tight with what you have to spend on the wedding versus, the $1 million wedding, unless you really just want to like give your money away, it needs to be like an educational process, something that you're revisiting throughout the planning process. And I love what you said that you've doubled the budget. I think a lot of times when people think like we're over that initial budget, that means like you failed at wedding planning. Like, wah wah, you failed, you're done, you ruined it. But as long as you're feeling comfortable with it, whether you're increasing the budget or decreasing it, maybe you decide as you get into it, you want a smaller guest count. And so you're kind of reining everything in. As long as you're educated about it, the time where it's an issue is when all of a sudden the final payments are due and it's like, what did we do? What happened?
Yeah.
How did we lose control? That's where
Yeah.
it's really bad. But if you get into the process and you realize, oh, you know what? Having a band is going to be a lot more expensive than we initially thought before we knew anything about planning a wedding, but it is important to us and we're okay increasing the budget by X amount. There's nothing wrong with that. It's an
Mhm.
important part of the planning too.
It really is. And here's the thing is like, I mean, a band is a perfect example. Like there are so many incredible bands that we've gotten to work with and so many more that I want to work with in the future. But bands, like just logically, in comparison to a DJ is typically one or
Yep.
two people. Like a traditional DJ
Yep.
is one or two people. Like maybe like the DJ itself and
Maybe an
then
assistant.
like
Yeah.
somebody to assist or do sound or something like that. Bands are 11
Yep.
plus people
Plus all the equipment that
plus
comes with each
sound,
person. Yeah.
equipment, everything, and I'm like, "You're gonna pay exponentially more," because even if you think of it as like you're paying per
Yeah.
person, essentially. So, like, don't be shocked when the DJ is 12 times
Yes.
less than the
Because it's physically that, yeah,
because
less people.
physically
Yeah.
it is 12 times
Yeah.
more. So So, I mean, a lot of it just kind of comes down to logic and everything like that. And there's like, there's so many incredible DJs that we
Yeah.
work with, and there's so many incredible bands, and it just depends on what you're trying to create. But that's also a really easy one where it's like, okay, maybe music isn't a
Yes.
priority. Because if it was a priority, I'd be like, yep, let's get the band, and then we'll kind of either cut or like lessen some other non
Yeah.
priority things for you. So I always try and make sure that I understand what
The
is a
priorities.
priority to
Yeah.
both my clients, like both in the
Yeah.
couple. I really want to make sure I understand like what is the most important thing to you and what is the most important thing to you. Let's make sure we get those really
Yes.
right, and then everything else
Yeah.
is a bonus.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, I always want to make sure that we're working with like a really great photo and video team because that's the memories that they get to
Yeah.
take back. So I'm not saying you have to spend $80 million, but I'm saying that you need to find somebody that you feel really like connected
Yes.
to, both for photo and video. So you can make sure that when the wedding does end, that you can
You
like
have
have
those
all these
memories,
incredible memories.
yeah. And it's
Oh yeah.
for photo, video, and planners, the other dynamic too, and your MC, whether it's a DJ or a band, the personality can really make a big difference too.
Oh my God.
Your photographer and videographer are literally
Yeah.
stalking you all day on your wedding day. So if you don't vibe with them, that can
They're
really ruin
connected to
the
you.
experience. And
Doesn't matter how good their work
yeah,
is. If you don't like them as a person, you're gonna have a problem.
absolutely. And same with your planner. Obviously, you're going to be working so
Yep.
closely with your planner that you want to have a good relationship with them. Not dismissing the importance of like your stationer or your baker, but just your interaction, especially on the wedding day, is not going to be that significant. And so if like you're not besties, it's okay. It's okay. Hopefully
That's
you will be,
that's
but you know, again, it's not as much of a deal breaker as if you just cannot stand your photographer and they're going to be in your
oh my god.
face all day on the wedding day. Yeah.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, like, I'll go through consultations, I mean, and I can definitely tell that I mean, it doesn't happen very regularly. Typically, the people who are finding me, at least nowadays, I'm very lucky that, like, they're all kind of weird and wonderful like me, and I love them. Vibe pretty quickly, and it's great. But there's definitely some that it's just like, oh, this is a little
Yeah.
harder, like to connect. And to me, that's going to be a really hard, like that's not going to be really hard just for me, but it'll be really hard for them too. And I want to make sure that they're hiring somebody that is literally, again, the
Yeah.
right person for the job. And sometimes it's not
Yeah.
me. And I always kind of like to say that like I am not for everyone and everyone is not for
Mhm.
me, and that's okay. And especially with planners, all of us are so
Yeah.
different and we're passionate about different things. And even like if you lined up all the luxury planners, like every single one of them
Yeah.
is different. And you need to find somebody that really gets
Yeah.
you and is going to look after
Yeah.
you the best they
Yeah.
can. Um, and yeah, it doesn't matter again how beautiful somebody's work is. You also need to, especially as a planner, like I'm going to spend hundreds, if not well over 1,000 hours
Yeah.
planning a wedding. And a lot of those hours are interacting with my clients and their families and vendors and everything like that. And if we didn't get along, I would not be able to do a great job for
Absolutely.
them and they would not
And if
enjoy
they
it.
didn't know that they could put their trust in you for it, you know, to be able to handle these things and trust that you are recommending the right people for them and all of that.
Trust is the magic
Yeah.
word. The moment, I mean, don't get me wrong, I still have clients that I know that they trust me, but I do have some clients that, and we've all had them that have trouble letting
Yes.
go. And not that I want them to ever let go, because I really do see that like planning is a collaborative
Absolutely.
process with my clients. So like again, they're in charge. Like I'm here to support them. But they do seek me out for my
Yeah.
expertise. That's what they're here for. But when you have a client that implicitly trusts you, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, that's when magic is made.
Absolutely.
Uh, like the wedding is amazing, like leading up to it's amazing, after's amazing, like oh my
I
gosh.
think
Yeah, like I definitely have some in my head
yeah.
that like I call them my unicorn clients that I'm I'm like, you shouldn't
That was
exist,
just
but you're like the
perfection.
mythical
Yeah.
creature. And
And I think that's a huge
I just
thing too in
love that.
talking about hiring your vendor team. Again, whatever level of wedding you're planning, whether it's a destination wedding, just the two of you, to the like ultra luxury, crazy, massive, week long event, knowing what's important to you and being able to trust vendors are also connected with you on that, it's going to be the main thing that helps you enjoy the actual day when it comes around, because there are going to be things that pop up that either go off plan or that you need to adjust, and your vendors are going to know what they're there for and know how to pivot or make the adjustments but still have the end game in mind for the two of you, and not have to bother you while you're getting your hair and makeup done, while you're getting photos done, and really just enjoying your day because your vendors have got you. You've got your trust in the vendors. Like it's such a huge component in it.
When your vendor team can show up on a day, or sometimes like for us, like a week or two long
Yeah.
build for a tent or something like that, if they can just be so excited, like you're
See it all
excited,
come together.
like
Yeah.
that wedding is going to be so
Yeah.
good. Like it doesn't matter how much you
Yeah.
spent on it. Like when you have a team that is just like so excited to be there with
Yeah.
you, it's again, that's where the magic
I
is
think
made.
that's one of the really unique things about what we do too, being in the wedding industry, wedding pro, is, of course we were talking before about how like people think wedding planners, it's like this perfect, fluffy, everything's pretty and you just play with flowers all day. But the reality is we're trying not to look like a sweaty mess, hiding from being in the pictures all day. Like it's not a glamorous thing.
I don't even try anymore. Like my clients just know
We're in our
that like
vendor
if they
black
see
trying to like duck out of pictures.
if they see me, like by the time guests get there, I try and like make myself
Yeah.
look presentable or hide in the shadows. But like up until then, I pretty much look like a dirty
Yeah.
gremlin. Like,
Yeah. And that's
like
such a huge component
they
of
know.
what we do, but like they don't think that, and there is like there's that work component of it where we're behind, Excel spreadsheets all day and stuff like that. But when it comes to the wedding day, I can't I would be hard pressed to think of any vendor that I would recommend for sure a wedding day as, oh, I've got to work. It's so different. Like it's like, oh, I can't
Yeah.
wait to see all of this come together, and be a part of the day, whether it is again like the smaller, more intimate classic wedding versus that ultra luxury experience. It's just event professionals love that, like, it's coming together. We get to see it all happen after all this time.
Yeah. I mean, the event and wedding industry is not something you work in
On accident.
just to
Yeah.
make money. Like this
No,
is
no, no,
not a
no, 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 no.
norm.
Yeah.
Like this is life
Yeah.
consuming, especially
You
like
gotta
with
love
what we
it.
do. You have to love it. If I did not love this, I would not do
Exactly. I
this.
wouldn't be
Like
giving up my
there are
weekends.
easier ways to
Yeah.
make money.
Yeah.
It's like that's just not like I am not here for the money. If the money comes, that's great. And that's amazing. That's a wonderful
Yeah.
byproduct. I like paying my mortgage. It's pretty
Yeah.
fabulous. Like I like going out to eat on occasion. My husband and I like to take like a vacation at least once like every few
Yeah.
years. Like we probably travel more, but it is what it is. I like feeding my dogs. Like I like being able to
Yeah.
live. That's wonderful. But I do not do weddings to
Yeah.
make money. I mean, I physically, as a business owner, yes, of course, do weddings to make money, but I would not pour this much of my life and heart and soul into it if I did not love it and I didn't have a
Yeah.
passion for it and the clients that I work with. The moment I stop loving this is the moment I stop working in
Yeah.
this industry.
Yeah. And I think we are both very lucky, at least in our area, that there are so many just passionate vendors that we both know that have that same mentality. And like those are the ones we're referring and wanting to work with. And that just from a selfish standpoint too, it makes our job easier on the wedding day, knowing that we trust the team, but it makes it more fun too. Like the majority of my friends are coworkers. They're other people that I
Because they're the only ones who can understand our
yeah,
lives.
we hang out on the weekends because we have weddings. But it's just
Or like all of my non-wedding people are like, "Oh, like what are you doing this weekend?" And I'm like,
work.
"Not not going wherever you want me to go. Like I love you, but no. Like I'm either working a wedding or I'm coveting this
Downtime.
little weekend
Yeah,
that is not
absolutely.
being taken up by a
Yeah,
wedding, and I'm probably cleaning
yeah.
my house. Like that's what I'm
But
doing."
it's so worth
So
it. It really is. It's just so worth it when you can just kind of sit back. And I'm gonna ask you about your favorite part of the day, and then also like favorite details when it comes to like the design piece of it. But
uh,
for me, it definitely is like a lot of times it's the first dance or when they're first coming into the room. Ideally, the couple gets a chance to see the reception space before the guests come in, and just kind of even if it's without the couple there yet, just like looking and being like, oh my god, we put all this together all of the time, and like seeing it actually go from like the orders and the spreadsheets to the reality of the event. That's definitely one of my favorite moments.
it's my favorite moment too. We call it the room
Yeah,
reveal, which I'm sure a lot of people do, but that definitely seen, especially the reception come, because that's also the most like design heavy portion, and also getting all of that set up in a finite amount of time and everything like that is quite a feat in itself. But being able to see everything kind of come to fruition, and then I always make my clients close their eyes and I lead them in and I put them where I want them and then I have them open their eyes. um, I There's definitely a lot of tears
yeah,
that happen at that point, because it also kind of like, because of, especially with the type of wedding that I have, but I'm sure it's any type of wedding, but we spend so many hours agonizing over everything, and it's kind of like the we've
yeah,
arrived, like we're here, like, and it's hard to believe sometimes with as much time as we put into planning it, that it's like we're actually
yeah.
here, and it goes by so
I was just gonna
fast.
say that's the one thing couples hear so much is that it's gonna fly by, but it's so true. It's so true.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
flies by, and when I have that moment, I typically like step out of frame because of course they're getting
yeah,
photographed as well, and like don't get me wrong, I get into some of the photographs with them, but like I want them to have this moment to themselves and kind of like take it all in and everything. So I'm kind of like out of
yeah,
frame and like telling them to open their eyes and everything, but like hugging them and being there with them in that moment where you can just see the joy.
yeah,
I just There's nothing
yeah.
like it.
It really is such an
I love
honor
it.
to be a part of like
Oh,
that moment
so good.
in a couple's lives that it just, anytime throughout the day, just being like, okay, they trust me to be able to do this. It's yeah, it's amazing. What are some of your favorite outside of the moment, like talking more like physical details or components of the day? What are some of your favorite things to either work with couples on or see on the wedding day? Like flowers, stationery.
I'm definitely a dining table girl. I am. Like we're gonna put so much time and probably a lot of money into the
Yeah,
tablescapes. And I will say typically most people who come and work with me, they're looking for that
yeah,
too. Like they know I love a good table. Because to me, coming from the hospitality industry, the dinner is a very
mhm,
important part for me. If you are serving a meal, serve a meal. We are not going to be there for an hour. We're probably going to be there for more like an hour and a half or
yeah,
2 hours. And we're going to have multi-course dinner and everything's going to be super well thought out. And we're going to do it. We're going to design an entire menu with them in mind and what their favorite
yeah,
things are. And sometimes we incorporate like family recipes from like their childhood, and like memories are created around the
yeah,
table. It is a universal human experience, eating together and breaking bread. And not to get too like gospely about it, but you spend so much dedicated time at that table. It needs to be really a special
yeah,
experience. And yeah, dance the night away and have great cocktails and like all of those things, but dinner is the culmination to, like, it's the biggest portion of like the
Yeah.
experience that we're creating for the legitimate wedding day if you're doing like a traditional like dinner based
Right. Yeah.
wedding. And I mean, being able to kind of get everybody to that point and have them all gather around these beautiful tables and I mean beautiful menus and all of the things and really creating that world for them in their like little 2 foot by two
Yeah.
foot space and making them feel really loved and cared for, because every guest has their own little
Yeah.
space and we want them to feel very at home there um, and very relaxed. So I would say tables are definitely my most favorite
Yeah.
thing by far.
And just
What about you?
the process of putting that together, I know obviously it differs for each couple and their priorities and all of that. But is it something that you completely like build upon for each couple, or is there something like generally like a process to it or a formula to it? How do you approach that? How do you create that space for each couple?
Well, any design, there's always layers of things. Of course, you need tables and you need chairs and you need to understand your venue and like where these are going. That's why before we even start designing, like knowing what the rentals are and everything, we do like floor
Yeah.
plans and things like that. We need to understand how things fit into the space and how people
Yeah.
are going to experience and maybe we do something like a little bit out of the ordinary or so on and so forth, or you have a little bit more of a challenging space, so there's only so many things you can do. So being able to understand the space first is the biggest priority, and then we get into kind of rentals, but it's kind of like a
Yeah.
layering system. Like of course you need like the bigger pieces of furniture like tables and chairs, then you need like your place setting, so you of course you have like your charger and bread plate, or if you're doing family style it's all of the china, and that's kind of like your foundational level for the place settings. But then you have flatware, you have glassware, you have like smaller details like napkins, menus, place cards, all of these things that make
Mhm.
that. And then of course there's the centerpiece and or decor proportion of it, like portion
Yeah.
of it, blah blah blah. And um I mean that's flowers, it's candles, it could be neither of those
Yeah.
things. Are we pin spotting the tables? Like what is the room lighting going to look like? How do you want guests to feel during that time? What is the mood that you're creating for
Yeah.
this? Is it dinner by candlelight and everything is super dark and cozy and warm and welcoming? Or are we in a bright light tent and everything is very fresh and airy and gardeny? And it's about, again, creating kind of like the mood
Yeah.
around the dinner. So there's a lot of components there, but the formula is pretty the same. Like you need all the same components. Like clearly you need plates and you need silverware and you need
That's what I was.
glassware. Like you need to be able to drink
Yeah, I
meat.
would say there's like
Um,
the functional components that you need. You need the tables, you need the chairs. Do you need a farm table? Do you need a chameleon chair? Do you need the chargers? No, those are like the add-ons that you can elevate. But if you need to bring some of those items in, you might as well make sure it fits with what you're looking to do. Yeah.
exactly. And it depends upon the space that we're doing too. I mean, this goes for the entire design, but especially like the dining tables and things like that. It's also really important that you design accordingly to the venue you're in
Yes.
as well. It doesn't matter what colors you like and so on and so forth. If you're choosing a venue and your the ideal color palette that you like doesn't fit,
Competes
it's
with
going to
it.
look like an
Yeah.
alien crash
Right.
landed in that venue. You need to also make the conscious choice of a venue that inspires you, that you can create something that's going to look
Yeah.
cohesive with the venue. It doesn't need to look like every wedding that's ever been there that's come before, but you need to make sure that you're creating something that complements the venue and complements you,
Absolutely.
so it makes it look like it was designed
For
for
that
this
event.
venue.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be, every once in a while we'll have a couple come to us after they've booked their venue. And either from a budget or a design standpoint, it's like, how did this happen? And throughout, if you've committed, and then throughout the rest of the planning process, you're just like competing with either struggling where that fits within the budget and limiting you for all these other things, or adding to the budget a bunch of decor or rental items because you have to be reinvent the space to make it fit with the event that you're trying to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, every decision you make from the very beginning to the very little details, it's consciously done, and it consciously weaves into the
Yeah.
next. And especially when it comes to your design and the experience and everything like that. I even tell that to people when it comes to like bridesmaids dresses and so on and so forth. Like they'll randomly choose a color, like, oh, we're going to have navy blue bridesmaids dresses, yet there is no navy blue
Anywhere.
anywhere in the design. And I'm like,
How did we get
why
here?
are
Yeah.
we wearing navy blue
Yeah.
dresses? Like, that it just doesn't even
Yeah.
make sense. So even from a fashion standpoint, whatever you wear, your wedding party wears, your like any your parents wear, your guests wear. I mean, on our websites for our that we build for our clients, like we give them a full-on dress code with suggested color palette. We even make small Pinterest boards of
Oh,
ideas for
wow.
them so they can understand what they can wear, like both men and women. And not to say that they have to do it. And we make that very clear on the website. Like, hey, if you're like, please feel free to be comfortable, but like it's like black tie or creative black tie or something like that. Like we want you to have, if you would like to have fun with the wedding, so on and so forth,
Yeah.
like here's a color palette for you to dress in. When you get those photos back and the entire room, like we've had ones where it's like we ask everyone to dress in
Yeah.
black,
It's
like,
amazing.
and you pan across that room as a
Yeah.
photographer and it's like a winter wedding or something like that. That's going to be so
Yeah.
beautiful.
And those are the little things
So,
that can make a huge difference.
yeah. And like the bride is in
Yeah.
white and then the groom puts on like a white dinner
Oh,
jacket and then everyone else is in black and they're the only ones in white. And you're just like, that was
yeah.
thought out.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love that.
So everything weaves
Yeah,
into the next.
absolutely. So with that in mind, what are your thoughts on like wedding trends?
I like wedding trends. I know that's a hot button topic. So I like wedding trends to a point. If it's like a fast and furious trend, I try not to kind of give into it, or we do it in a really small
Okay.
way. Um, I always like to kind of say that our weddings have this classic
Yeah.
undertone, but with kind of these very unique, very personal, very artistic details. Like even when it comes down to like what I wear and stuff, like on a daily basis, if you see me out in public, when I don't look like a gremlin or a bridge troll, as I like to call it. Like if you see me most of the time at the grocery store, like I am wearing like a
Yeah.
black hoodie with like my all cap, and I'm just like, it's Sunday, I'm shopping, like girl is not
But
wearing
your work
makeup.
attire.
But like I always kind of like equate my fashion sense as like again classic undertones, but it always kind of looks like I've walked out of an art
Yeah.
museum. Like I'm like the curator of an art
Yeah.
museum. Like there's always something like a little bit visually like artistic, a little bit out of the norm, and that's how I actually describe my
Yeah.
events as well, and that's what people look for from us. Um, but yeah, so trends is I love a lot of
Yeah.
them. I also hate a lot of them. There's definitely some that can just go away and stay buried
Yes.
forever. Like I never want to see them ever again. But there's ways to incorporate trends in a really kind of subtle or classic way that when you look back on things, like you're still really happy you made that decision, even if it's not necessarily still
Yeah.
in fashion, like in fashion. Because like again, like my wedding was 13 years ago, and there's definitely things that I'm like, yeah, if I was planning that today, I wouldn't have made that decision, but I
Yeah.
still love it. So because it's my wedding, it was I made the decision to have it, so I'm still
Yeah.
gonna love it. Like you should embrace who you are, and who you are in this moment and what you're doing. But being able to kind of weave both classic notes as well as things that are a little bit more on
Yeah.
the trendy side and do it in a really smart way where you can enjoy both. That's my
Yeah.
take on that. But I think everybody has that's a very subjective thing. So like I don't think and just do
Yeah.
you.
Well,
Do
I think,
you?
comparing it to fashion and even the comparison to homes is super relevant too, because some people want the ultra trendy fashion, and it's important to them for people to know that they're on trend, they're making brave, unique choices, and that's important. And so of course their wedding is probably going to be something similar, right? And their house is going to look a little bit different if they want to keep up with the things that are trendy and all of that. And I think the majority of couples and people fall into that classic, like, you don't want to look back at your pictures and be like, oh God, what was I thinking? Like you were just saying, you still want to relate to it and have that classic vibe to it. And trends can be
Yeah, I
scary with
mean,
that.
don't do every trend known to
Yeah.
man, like, kinda like a
Yeah.
little bit, and, like, keep other things again, a little bit more
Yeah.
classic. And I mean, like, if you walked into my house, I mean, I was clearly born in the wrong century. Like, I live in a 1912, it looks like it's 1912
It's
in here.
stunning.
That's very much my
Yeah.
vibe, and I love that, but that's very
Yeah.
me. Whereas, like, I look at, one of my very best friends, she's also in the wedding industry. Her fashion sense couldn't be any more different than mine, and her home is light and bright and airy, and I have like this dark, and like everything is wood, and I'm a little bit vampire-ish, and like all that stuff. And what I love, I so love that
Yeah.
about us. I mean, this is the same thing going back to like, I love the fact that like we're celebrating kind of like who we
Yeah.
are. And that's what I want my clients to do, is like we design weddings based on our
Yeah.
clients. Like, so all of our weddings, although yes, there's similar like threads, because of course I'm the same every time and my team is the same. Um, None of our weddings
Yeah.
look alike. They don't have the same color palettes. Some are modern, some are old world, some are artistic and weird and wonderful. And I love a good
Yeah.
challenge and creating, like, I don't want to repeat
It's not
weddings.
cookie cutter.
Like, every single wedding we do is a new challenge
Yeah.
for me, because it is two people that I've never worked with before, and they're not like anybody else on the planet. So why would their wedding
Yeah.
look like somebody
Oh, I
else's?
love that.
So that's like my
Yeah.
view. But I say embrace what you love. Embrace what you
Yeah.
love. I mean, if it's a little bit trendy, that's fine. And just know that, like, when you look at it in 5 years, it might not be in fashion, but first of all, it'll probably be in fashion in another
Yeah.
10, because everything moves
Yeah.
around again. Um, but you just have to remember that, like, this is who you were when you did
Yeah.
this, and there's something to celebrate about
Yeah.
that. And I think that's great.
I love that. I love that so much. And again, just comparing it to, yes, you're bound to have a little bit of that cringe factor anytime you look back on anything 10, 20 years later.
That's anything.
Yeah, but I think as long as you're following what feels right for you, again, whether it is that trendsetter, like doing the new thing versus the classic, what would feel odd is if you did like an uber trendy, like only the trends, super modern home, and then your friends walk in and you're like, where am I?
Like, wow.
Where am I? This is not Ashley's house. It's the same kind of thing with the wedding. If you try to fight that too much, people aren't going to feel like it's your event or your wedding.
Yeah, it's so funny because actually, like, I'm staring like like on the other side of the computer is like my kitchen, and we bought our house as a flip. And so the people who flipped it, we've lived here for 2 years, and one of these days I will change it. But all of my kitchen and bathrooms literally like look like the most modern, like Home Depot stock. Like, there's nothing wrong with them. They're highly functional. We'll be able to use them for many years, but like, you look at our house and you walk into the kitchen and you're like, one of these things is not like the other. And and I'm like, the moment I see like people come into my kitchen, they're like, oh, it's a lovely kitchen. I'm like, thank you so much for saying that. I'll be
Yeah.
ripping it out as soon as I can. So, because I'm like, why do we have this super modern
Yeah.
kitchen in this very old
Probably because
like
that's what they
schoolhouse?
thought would
Like,
sell better, something more neutral.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Again, functional, it'll work for many years. Like, I am not going to look that gift horse in the mouth.
Yeah.
Like, that's totally fine. But like, one of these days, I will have a kitchen in here that complements the
Well, I think
house.
that's a super
So
relatable idea too when you flip that and put it into the wedding world too. There are going to be things that you find your dream house, but maybe it's like, I don't love the kitchen. Is that a
yeah,
huge priority? If not, great, that's your house. You make it work. And same with the wedding. You might find a venue that's perfect for like everything except one thing, and if that's not a huge priority, now if it is a huge priority, if you were, you know,
yeah, it's just use that
yeah, if
space.
you were in the kitchen all day, every day, then you'd want that to be like your happy place. But if it's
Mhm.
not, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're making sacrifices that will impact the day necessarily. You will have to talk about some of those priorities. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, we even play with a lot of those things. There's a venue here in Detroit that's incredibly gorgeous. We love working there. We do every now and again, and it's a pretty high-end venue here. And but their cocktail hour space sucks. It's like so
yeah,
bad. Like the furniture that like it's a beautiful room, but the furniture they purchased for it just like does
yeah.
not like it does look like an alien crash landed in it, and we can't remove the
Right.
furniture. We can't do any of that, and that's fine. But I'm like, okay, it's cocktail
Yep.
hour. I was just like, we're really not, it's
Yeah.
an hour and a half max. And I look at my clients and I'm like, this is an excuse for us to not put hardly any money in this space because you already
Yep.
have furniture. We don't need to rent anything else. This is great. And let's put all of that money from that design into the things that you
Yeah.
prefer, which it would be like the design of like the dinner
Yeah.
tables or the dancing space or something like that. And I'm just like, we'll just
Yeah.
work around it. And you know what? Your photographers are going to barely take any photos
Yeah.
in here.
And if they do, it's most
So
about the people at cocktail, pictures of the people chatting and
exactly.
hugging and all of that. It's not about the furniture in certain areas. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there's even like galleries on my website that you'll never see the cocktail hour
I'm
space.
thinking like, okay, I have an idea. I have like a list of a couple of the venues I think you might be talking about. Let me go find out.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're not going to post those ones.
No, I'm not like no one cares about the cocktail hour
Yeah.
space. Like you're there as long like the guests as long as they get a drink and some food, that's
Yeah.
all they care about. So I mean, if we can make the cocktail hour space beautiful, then
Great.
great, but that's typically not where we want to sink a
Yeah,
lot of money.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we could probably talk for literally hours, and I'm sure I will have you back, maybe talking about more design or specific things in the future. But before I let you go, can you share like one or two tips for couples, whether they are in the luxury, ultra luxury wedding category or more the traditional category or budget friendly? What's like a way that they can make their wedding feel personal or bring in that experiential piece that you strive to get? Is there anything that you would advise them to kind of keep in mind or think about?
So, first of all, biggest piece of advice, no matter what, you do need a day of coordinator or wedding manager or
Yeah.
whoever. It doesn't matter what your budget is. Even I hardly had a budget for my wedding 13 years ago, and we even had a
Yeah.
day of coordinator. Like you cannot do it on the day, and your venue coordinator is not the same. It's not the same thing. They've got a full-time other job trying to make sure that everything else at the venue is running and that no one burns
Yeah.
their
And that's what
building
they
down.
should be
Like
focused
that's
on.
what exactly. They are not your day of
Yeah.
coordinator. So get a day of coordinator. If you can and you do have some extra money, get a planner, whether it's partial, full, luxury, all of those things. If you can do it, especially if you're in the luxury space, you should
Yeah.
definitely have a planner. You should have somebody who is it's literally
Yeah.
their job to help guide you through this. I'm not going to lie, very complex, very stressful
Absolutely.
process. Like I'm not going to mince words. And I even tell my clients this all the time. And it's just like, my job is to make this the least stressful process for you, but it is not going to be
Yeah.
not stressful.
There's no one that can make
Like,
it not stressful at all.
when you have money and emotions and all of these wants, but not necessarily an endless pocketbook and all these other things, which again, I've not met many people that have an
Yeah.
endless pocketbook. And like there's going to be stress. That's just
Yeah.
normal. So if you can hire somebody to help guide you through that process, especially if you're in the luxury space. Beyond that, to try and make things a little bit more experiential, do you. That's probably the best thing I can do because that's way harder than you
Yeah.
think. You are going to want to give into 80 million trends, and you are going to want to do what your friend Sally did because that's what she did and she's super popular.
And
I mean,
everyone wants
literally,
to
it doesn't
share.
matter how old
Yeah.
we are. We never get out of middle school and high
Yeah.
school. Like we
It's
always
just
want
on
something
social
that
media
somebody
now.
else
Yeah. And everybody wants to share their
exactly.
opinions with you as soon as you're getting married and tell you what you should or shouldn't do. And it's all meant with good intentions. You know, they want to be helpful,
Yeah.
but yeah, staying true to what the two of you want is so important.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not eloping, basically, where it's just the two of you and you can do whatever the heck you
Yeah.
want, and you have guests, like please make sure that everybody else has a great experience too. Don't be so selfish that you literally cause other people like to not have a good
Yeah.
experience. But what I'm saying is design things, eat the food that you want, and go to the venue you want to, and do things that are right by you. There are many people who doesn't matter how much money they have that they don't want a 400
Yeah.
person wedding. They want to take 20 people to Italy or France and they want to do something beautiful and intimate, or somebody wants to go to the mountains with like just a handful of people, or they just want 50 in the backyard of their parents' house. And weddings, there's no right or
Yeah.
wrong. You just have to embrace what you want and who you
Yeah.
are, and don't give in to what
Mhm.
everybody else is saying you should do. You know what, trust your
Yes.
gut, you know what you want to do. And then if you do want a more traditional like larger wedding, or so, I mean, we have weddings that are right, I mean, just for this year we have weddings that are 30 people and we have weddings that are
Wow.
350. I mean, we have the gambit and we're trying to do the same thing with every single one of them. But like, listen to the music that you want to listen to, and yeah, again, eat the food that you want and have the decor that you want. And it doesn't matter if it's trendy or
Yeah.
not. If you love it, then you're gonna love it.
Yeah. I think that's so important. And talking about that stuff early on, get those priorities done before you get into the pretty stuff that you want to jump into. I know that's fun, but
Yes. Do your needs before your wants.
that's so funny. I didn't even mean for us to talk about
Don't
that, but
spend
it was like,
everything
no,
on
your
the venue.
priorities first.
No, no, you're gonna get into
Yeah.
trouble. You gotta don't spend everything on the venue without understanding what your budget is. Like if you can afford the venue, great, that's
Correct.
amazing. And you still have enough money for everything else, but do not splurge everything on a venue and then have
Oh, it
nothing
happens a lot.
or go into
Yeah.
debt over
It
something.
happens a
Like
lot.
it's just not worth
Yeah.
it.
Well,
So
thank you
yeah.
so much, Ashley. This was so much fun. Like I said, I have a feeling we'll be doing like a part two again coming soon. Where can everybody
Happy
find
to.
you and see more of your beautiful weddings?
So you can go to my Instagram at Festoons and Flourishes, or you can go to festoonsandflourishes.com. And yeah, check out our work and our weird and wonderful
I love it.
everything. And we have a lot of really incredible weddings coming up this year with such incredible couples. And I'm just so excited to share more. But right now I'm in my little like
Yeah.
wedding planning cave where I'm like, for the next like 5 weeks, and they're like, no one talk to me. So
Living on
like,
the computer screen, right?
I know, like everybody's like, why don't you share more of your like behind the scenes? And I was like, because my behind the scenes is 15 hours on a computer
Me
every
in
day.
yoga
Like,
pants and
no,
Excel. Yeah.
yeah. Like yoga pants is like a stretch. Like it's probably like my husband's sweatshirt that I stole and like pajamas that I was wearing the
The
night before. Let's
glamorous
just
life of us wedding
so yeah.
planners, right? It's all J Lo.
I will leave you with this. I always like to say, like, luxury weddings are the least luxurious experience you will ever have behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
So if you work a luxury wedding, it's long hours, you're dirty, you're sweaty, like there's a lot of effort that goes into making something look effortless.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then days after of not being able to move.
We call it the
The
wedding
wedding
hangover.
hangover.
And
Yep.
no, I do not drink at my weddings. It is not
I
that
was
type
gonna
of
say, when
hangover,
you've
but
not
it
had
is
a
a
drop to drink, but you still feel like you got hit by a bus.
dehydration. No matter how much water I drink, I'm still dehydrated. I'm a zombie the
Oh
next
my
day.
goodness. Yep. I
Oh
feel
yeah,
ya. 'Tis
yeah.
the season, right?
No, I will say I drink Pedialyte the next day, and that
Yep, or
always
liquid
helps. So
IV is one of my new favorites. Yeah, definitely
I do love that
chug
one
some
too.
liquid IV,
So
but
yeah,
still it's yeah, nothing's enough on a wedding day.
and a full Jets pizza and some Reese's peanut butter
Oh, now my
cups.
stomach's gonna start growling.
I know, right? And I'm like, I'm great. So
Well,
yeah. Anyway, well, thank you
thank
so
you,
much for
Ashley.
having
This was
me.
so much fun, and I hope I get to see you like in person soon.
Oh, it's